Okay, hey everyone, I'm Matthew.
I'm Katherine, and so we're here to talk to you about how we built collaboration with a distributed team at the New York Times, but also how we took that team and we navigated the changing cultural landscape of the publishing world, and was able to turn that into not only revenue growth, but also audience growth and deepening engagement.
So the first thing that we should share with you guys is, there you go. This idea that the times they are a-changing, and this is no more acute than at the New York Times. We're a 160-year-old organization, and the pace of digital change at the New York Times is faster than ever. Certainly over the last 3 years that we're going to talk about, like the organization is completely transformed from what it was 3 years ago. We work specifically within the real estate category, which is one of the largest commercial categories in terms of the revenue that it makes, but also one of the largest audience categories in terms of engagement and depth of engagement and subscriber growth. So we're going to talk a little bit about the dynamics of those two things and how they work together. But really, you know, a lot of our work is about charting the path through some pretty uncertain waters in terms of people's consumption of the news and how that's changed over the past 5 to 10 years. The idea of willing to pay for the news, young people's consumption of the news, the idea that the news comes to you now rather than something that you seek out. Consumption habits throughout the day on mobile, like we're essentially a newspaper organization that is having to rapidly start to think about, you know, what are those behaviors and what are those habits throughout the day in terms of desktop, mobile, tablet, you know, those kind of things. All at the same time in terms of keeping the plane in the air, making enough money, and adapting to all this stuff. So a lot of what we're doing on the product side is really charting a path through some pretty strong cultural headwinds. And this is more acute than ever over the last 6 months in terms of the sort of fake news phenomenon, a relationship with what's going on in Washington, and the perception of what the New York Times does, and the role that the Times has in the country as an authoritative, balanced source of information about what's going on in the world. So the mission of the Times and how we support that in terms of process and how we write stuff down and how we work with developers and stuff like that is what we're going to share with you today. So we started as a team about 3 years ago. Essentially what we're going to share with you today is a story of 75 sprints. And we started 3 years ago because the real estate category at the Times, it's a much loved section. Our readers are incredibly passionate about what we do, and real estate as a topic, especially in New York, is the source of much passion, but also frustration as well. Everybody has this awful sort of landlord story, or people are sort of judged in New York in terms of where they live. You know, say, well, where do you live? Well, I live in Williamsburg. Oh, I see. You know, and there's like that kind of thing that happens in New York. But we started. The work that we were tasked with was essentially rejuvenating a distressed category in terms of revenue declines and audience declines that had been happening around the section. So our work was really to come in and say, what's going on with the products that we build, the relationship with the newsroom, the relationship with the advertising department, and how do we work with all those things together, and what do we build, and how do we work in terms of making sure that revenue and audience are both growing. So what we started with was this. This is literally what we started with. So I arrive, and I'm tasked with building a team, and as the product director, one of my first questions was, how on earth does all this stuff work? We have search products, we have an iOS app, we have a relationship with the newsroom, revenue declines, these kind of things. Like, how does all this stuff kind of work? And this is what I was handed. And quite honestly, it sort of really kind of terrified me. Like, okay, there's a bunch of spreadsheets printed out here, and nothing is really kind of written down. So what we inherited was a whole bunch of stuff that was either in email, old PowerPoint decks, Google Docs, inside of people's heads, you know, in messenger apps, that kind of stuff. And it was really kind of terrifying. So this idea of sort of writing stuff down was like one of the first things we had to start thinking about. But more importantly, we had to start thinking about what the kind of raw materials and the atomic elements, I guess, of like what we had to work with. So the main thing that we had to work with was a set of distributed teams, and Katherine will talk a little bit about how we united these things. But in terms of the sort of dev and design resources that we had available to us, we had distributed teams in Helsinki, Romania, and India, and some internal resources, and then some project management resources off-site, but also in New York. And none of these teams had really spoken to each other. There was like a mobile team in Helsinki and a sort of back-end and desktop team in Romania and India, and there was no real collaboration between any of these teams. In fact, they were actually kind of skeptical and wary of each other, because I think as vendors, they thought, you know, well, if the Times team starts working more with these guys, they're going to eat into our business and our relationship. So there was sort of this very unhealthy relationship between the two teams, and they, as a result, like, they were very much impacted by the business challenges that were going on. These teams were at the mercy of the sales team, and the sales team would say, you know, revenue is down, we need to build this new shiny thing, and there was this sort of terrifying channel of communication where the salespeople would be emailing the developers directly. And that was like one of the most sort of scary things to me that I was inheriting, was there was no process for like prioritization. It was like, you know, this client that's spending, you know, $1 million a year wants this button to be red, so it should be red. And then the next day it would be this client that's spending $1,001 wants this button to be green, so it should be green. And like there was no process, and like that was one of the first things that we had to sort of go in and address, was like just to put this wall in there where we said, you know, salespeople, you deal with us as the product team, and do not talk to the devs, like, or at least don't talk to them directly like that. But the business challenges were basically that we needed to grow audience and revenue from a display business, but also from a audience and subscriber business. The Times is a subscriber model in terms of how we think about money. And as the product lead, supporting the needs of like the display business and this subscriber business is something that we'll sort of take you through in terms of how we solve for that from a process perspective. But also there's cultural change. The newsroom and the role of the newsroom is absolutely critical at the Times, and the way that the newsroom operates, you know, there wasn't really like a whole lot of documentation around how they thought about what they did. A lot of this existed in editors' heads, for example. And the idea of like using analytics and data to grow audience or to think about optimizing audience, there was no real culture of that. So a lot of the work that we had to do was about addressing those kind of problems, to think about audience development, deepening engagement, and solving for different ways of doing things that would be different from the newspaper or different from sort of republishing what we're doing on the newspaper online. And then lastly, there's this idea of technical debt. Like I said, it was a much loved category, but it hadn't really had a lot of love. There was a lot of things that were breaking, really as a result of like what the sales team were doing to the dev team. And there was a lot of like things that were broken and not working. The UX was very, very old and aging. So this is essentially sort of the business problem that we inherited here. So as we started to get a handle on the path forward, the first thing that we decided to do, and I have this sort of manila folder example in my head, is that we decided that there we go. Whoops. That we had to start writing everything down. That was absolutely imperative, not just in terms of our own sanity, but also in terms of communicating our value and progress to our stakeholders internally, to say, okay, this is exactly where we are in the process. This is what's going on. This is how we're going to document how we think about what we do. But also, it was very, very helpful in terms of aligning all the different stakeholders. The relationship between the ad department and the editorial department, those are very, very church and state at the New York Times. And this idea of sort of the relationship between those two things is very, very acute in the real estate section. You know, a lot of what we write about with our journalism is about things that are for sale. And the two worlds had not really mixed, and the product team was right in the middle of all of this stuff. So the idea of writing things down and saying like, okay, we are going to build this stuff with the newsroom, and here's how we're going to monetize this, like that level of alignment creating transparency around that idea became absolutely imperative almost immediately. But also just thinking about how the newsroom thought about what they did, writing things down in terms of sharing data and progress to them as well was really kind of key. So here's a couple of examples of what we mean by that. And when I say writing things down, I want you to pay a particular attention to the left-hand side here. The way that we use Confluence in our team is not just as like a technical repo or a wiki or anything. We literally put like everything that touches the category in Confluence. So our marketing efforts are in there, audience development efforts, things we're doing around video, things to do with all the different apps, things to do with sort of more strategic things, business partnerships. And we use Confluence as a way to really kind of like unite all of these things into one place for the entire business. So we think a little bit more holistically about Confluence in terms of not just what we build, but why we're building it and who we're building it for, so that we can actually share all this stuff out to the salespeople and the newsroom, and everybody's looking at the same stuff. And as a result of this kind of thing, we start to see progress that we'll that we'll talk about as part of this as well. So this is an example of like audience development, like the kind of notes that we would share out and visualizations of what we would share out. This is geared more towards the newsroom, but this is really helpful for like the advertising people as we sort of try to unite these two sides and sort of get rid of this idea of sides. Where like the advertising people can see like, oh, page views are growing this month, or, you know, the team is still working on their SEO stuff, or, you know, the depth of engagement isn't as strong as the product team would like it to be. And like Confluence served as like a really great place to go out and share all that stuff out, especially historically, because once we started to see this stuff over 6 months, we could go back and say, well, where were we 6 months? What did we think like the typical traffic for a real estate article would be? And like that's the kind of thing where the newsroom started to feel real momentum, which is really, really important for our team health, I think. So that's like more on the editorial side, and then there's like feature development, and this is an example of what we mean by this kind of stuff. So not just you know, what we're building in the newsroom, but why we're building things in terms of search products where you can go look for an apartment on the New York Times, and why would we would be changing there. We're very blessed to have a design team that likes to write things down, which can be a rarity, I think. But like trying to understand from a designer's perspective how they're thinking through a problem, how they think about the user. And we as a team had not really had a big legacy of thinking about users at all. Like I said, we're a very commercially driven category historically. And so we had an incredible amount of depth of knowledge about our advertisers, the people that spend money with us, but not a whole lot of knowledge about our users, the people that are actually sort of using this thing on a day-to-day basis, or our readers. So, you know, defining these problems, you know, as we started to work through this stuff and started to write it down and document things, there were themes that started to arise out of this stuff. So the first set of things that we did is, especially in terms of aligning these distributed teams that were sort of skeptical of each other, we said, you know, you guys are all going to be kind of in this together, and we all sync together if you know, if we think about it like that. So we set principles, and we set 2 sets of principles, one for the business and one for the team. And everybody sort of aligned around this idea of sort of common purpose. So the way that we think about this is we had sort of like a tremendous amount of audience on the readership side that wasn't necessarily translating to doing other things with the real estate category. So we wanted people to read the articles in enormous numbers, and that was happening, but they weren't necessarily going and doing other things with us, like searching for an apartment. So the idea of sort of aligning everybody's efforts around these 3 things, of like turning readers into searchers, turning searchers into finders, and focusing on conversion and the depth of experience of like what happens in the search product, not just pouring people in, but actually like making that a meaningful experience for them. And then ultimately turning customers into partners. This is a really kind of key set of ideas that, you know, everybody had pinned to their desk, and we really kind of worked through this as a team, and the editorial side and the business side were really kind of united around this stuff. But then for the devs and the designers and the project managers and the product people in the category, we tended to think about our work a little bit differently. Like, yes, we had this sort of high-level view of like, okay, this is ultimately, you know, informing the things that we're going to build. But what we really think we do at the Times is three things. We think we solve problems, we think we build relationships, and we think we have fun. And this is really like our working kind of philosophy in our group. And this is really hard to do, to hit all three every single day. You know, sometimes you can be solving problems and having fun and really pissing people off. Or you can be building relationships and solving problems, but it is no fun at all. And like we try our best to kind of hit all these three things with everything that we do. And it's sort of like a really good sort of guiding mantra that we find in parallel to like solving those business problems as well. So the last bit before I hand over to Katherine is this idea of data everywhere. This is particularly acute in sort of aligning the editorial side and the business side around purpose. And providing transparency around data was really, really key, because it's really important that the ad people express like momentum around investment to their advertisers and say, you know, traffic is growing here, or, you know, you should spend money in these places, and sort of communicating that kind of story. But also on the editorial side, the idea that their efforts were making a difference in the readers' lives, that's like incredibly rewarding for a set of journalists and editors to hear, and not something historically that they'd ever really focused on. A lot of what they perceived to be successful was really anecdotal, like, oh, my friend told me they saw it on the homepage, or, you know, I know we got a good response to that thing that was in the paper on Sunday, like all that kind of stuff. And like giving them the muscles and the confidence to talk with authority about, you know, pretty detailed stuff in their world, video completion rates, that kind of stuff, was incredibly motivating for them, and obviously became a very, very key audience driver later on. So in terms of how we actually went and did that with the team, I'll pass over to Kathy.
So we're writing everything down. We have our principles. Those are in Confluence. Those are written down. And we have data sets about everything. But what did that mean for the day-to-day of the team? It meant that we needed to get them all together and working in the same direction and working behind those principles and understanding what those data sets meant and understanding what was in our Confluence. So like Matthew said, our teams were in Romania and India, other offices in New York and Helsinki, and they weren't just in different countries and just on different JIRA boards, they were in different JIRA instances. So if there was a problem that needed to be solved, they could not talk to each other on JIRA. They couldn't talk to each other in Confluence. They couldn't go and look at those things. So we united them. We got them together on the same JIRA board. We got them together on the same Confluence and working towards the same roadmap. And not just our team, not just our developers and our designers, but they got to see what was going on in advertising and marketing with our internal partners as well as our external partners, and that worked vice versa. Our sales team was able to see, yes, that request that you put in, that's on our roadmap. We're gonna get to it. It's not a priority right now because check out the data set that we have on this other Confluence page. Look at our thinking, see how we've prioritized things, and if you disagree with that, come and talk to us. So it really opened up transparency and opened up the opportunity for us to have conversations with our team and with our stakeholders. We also were able to meet and understand the vision. So I know we're talking about distributed teams, we're talking about how to work with people who are in Helsinki and India, but it's really important that you carve out the time for everybody to come together. I know this doesn't look that exciting to you guys, but this is a
historic moment.
This is monumental for us. This is the first time, these teams have been working together for 5 or 6 years, and this is the first time that we had our desktop team talking to our mobile team. And our desktop team was based in India, Romania, and New York. Our mobile team, which did the mobile web and the iOS app, was based in Helsinki, and they came to New York, and they came to the Times, and we got together, and right there, they're solving a map problem. In real estate, maps are really important. And not having been able to solve these problems together before, this was a monumental moment. It allowed for consistency across our platforms, and it allowed for us to really build that foundation for 6 months later, when there was another problem where we had to solve it, they knew what each other looked like. They could picture the other person in their mind. And we were able to get through those problems quicker. This worked so well that the next time the team came to New York, they were dressing the same. And so we've established these relationships, we're solving problems, and of course we can't forget to have fun. What's more fun than Shake Shack and eating it in the New York Times cafeteria? I don't know. Okay, so we've got all this data set. It's all in Confluence. Now, how do we scale our process? The first thing that we did was move to NYT Beta. Now, I know you guys are all thinking, oh, beta, I know that. It's an incubator. We worked in one, I've worked in one, I know a friend who works in one. It's not that exactly. We're beta in the sense that we test hypotheses, we're experimental, we're always trying to build tools and keeping the user top of mind, but we're not an incubator. What we are is we're a service layer around our core news report. So you've got the news report at the heart of what the New York Times does, but you also have all of these other things that as a company we have. For example, we've had an archive of thousands and thousands of recipes for years, dating back to the 60s. And up until a few years ago, there was no way for anyone to access those recipes. So what did we do? What did beta do? We had a hypothesis that users wanted to access those recipes and that they would trust the instinct of the New York Times to serve them to them. So we built a search product for it. And now that has grown into a very successful product where people are saving recipes, returning to it on a daily basis, and access it, and we're growing it. And so that's where we moved. And what this allowed us to do is really change our focus from the advertiser to the user. As a whole team, our developers, our designers, project, product, advertising, we're thinking about the user instead of the advertiser. We're thinking about that person who's looking for the apartment and not the person who's selling the apartment. So what else? What next? We realigned our team roles. Now, if you remember that shot of the first visit to New York, you had our desktop team and you had our mobile team. Now, that's not really great for any type of cross-functional work, is it? So real estate, very data heavy. What team? Our desktop team is the one that's been working on this forever. They know the data. It's in their blood. So let them focus on it. Let them own that. Let them take all of these different feeds from different brokerages, parse them out, send them to different endpoints on our product. And let's have that iOS team that really focuses on the front end and how the user is interacting with our product, and let them focus on the front end across all platforms. And so we did that. And that allowed us to that allowed the team to have the space and the time to solve problems in a cross-functional way. In that same JIRA instance, in that same Confluence, they can talk to each other. We can have stand-ups where everyone has their camera on, you can see their faces, and we can talk about problems and understand that we need to have the whole team together sometimes to solve these things. It also allowed us to build our agile muscle, our Scrum muscle. So the team, which my team really loves estimation, which is something I get to say because none of my developers are here. But sometimes you can't estimate properly without having all of your team there. And so we were able to use tools like planningpoker.com to do estimations and build our Scrum muscle in a cross-platform way with somebody in India, with somebody in Helsinki, and somebody in Romania. We were able to do retros that way, using a lot of tools and building that muscle and having the team work as one because we had realigned each of their focus and really set them up for success in that way. So what else? Transparency around everything. I know we keep coming back to this, but it's so key. If you have somebody who's starting their day 12 hours before you're waking up, you need them to know exactly what you're thinking. You need them to be able to start working without relying on a product owner or project manager to come in and tell them what to do. So we've got transparency around all of it. And like we said, we have audience development, revenue goals, and business development all in our Confluence. You can go and you can see the way that we're thinking about problems. But we also have all of our job stories in Confluence based on the designs that our designer puts in and explains her thinking. We've got those job stories right there that link straight out to JIRA. And we have release notes. So why are job stories so important to us? It's because our thinking, the business thinking, is right in the JIRA ticket. It explains the why, not just the how. It lets somebody know when it's 2 a.m. in New York and they're working on something and it's 8 a.m. in Helsinki, they know exactly what we were thinking, so they can think through those problems and bring any questions that they still have to stand up at 10 a.m. New York time without having lost any time. Otherwise, things get pushed back a day every time they have to ask a question. And then we have release notes. And this is exciting because it's, again, that transparency for our internal and our external partners. It's a moment during demo where we get to celebrate the things that we've done on each 2-week sprint. We get to show what's happening, and we can really show, what impacted the user. How did this work out? We can link to all of our JIRA tickets in there. You can see this sprint is great. We had mostly stories. We had a couple bugs, but we were able to take care of everything and keep our velocity at the standard that we had set. So what next? We've scaled our process. We've got transparency down, and now we have to align with the business, and I'm going to let Matthew talk about that.
Sure. So one of the great things I will say about the distributed team and the way that we work is, as a product owner, it's like Christmas every morning because there's like a whole bunch of stuff that's been done while you're asleep.
Yes.
So I will say that I'm very grateful for that. But there's also a lot of questions that you wake up to as well, which can also be fun. So this idea of aligning with the business, like Katherine said, this move towards this move to NYT Beta, which is really like this service journalism layer that's around the core news report. There's all this other stuff that you can do with the Times. A lot of what we've been focusing on from a process perspective was making sure that the designers and the developers in particular had enough time and space kind of carved out of their day so that they could do the best work. That was really what we were focusing on. It's like, how do we just make the team understand that they have time to solve problems? And that was a really kind of key thing that we were working on. But as we move towards more of a subscriber focus than a commercial focus, we're actually solving the same commercial problems, but in a completely different way. So instead of focusing on like advertiser needs, that was still a goal that we had, but we were solving it by actually like making things more focused on users. And that sounds like a very simple, sort of straightforward, like it should always work like that. But as like a commercial category inside of a newspaper that has its roots in things like the classified business, as we sort of face the cultural headwinds of like brokerages spending less money on media, or people going and searching, on much more sort of heavier, more robust platforms, or just people's consumption of the news changing, the idea of becoming more user-centric was absolutely imperative. So one of the things that we had started to focus on was really this idea of like talking to users more, which is a really dumb thing to come share at Atlassian. But like we had no real culture of really being able to do this. And one of the things that really started to resonate with us is that when you looked at our team room, we had no real evidence of who we served as a consumer of the things that we built. So the idea of thinking about Jane and her particular apartment search problem, or Krishanda, who was this amazing individual in Brooklyn, and like how she thought about what we wrote from an editorial perspective, on the one hand was like incredibly humbling, especially for the newsroom, who very much pride themselves on their journalistic expertise and their domain knowledge. And the idea of putting users and journalists together, there's no real culture of that at the Times until we started to do this kind of stuff. And a lot of what the users were telling our journalists in particular was really contentious. Like, you guys write about like super high-end apartments, and this has nothing to do with my life, and I'm trying to find an apartment, and you're just telling me about trophy properties in Tribeca. And like this sort of dissonance between like the readership and what we thought the readership was this sort of great product problem to partner with the newsroom on in terms of solving. So what we ended up doing was sort of going through this product journey and sort of holding the hand of the newsroom to become more user-centric in terms of how to grow audience. And that resulted in this, which is basically editorial development based on user needs, and like getting at user needs as a way of actually solving for things. So it's sort of removing columns that are about sort of things that don't really relate to, I guess, the ordinary person, right? So it's like, you know, when we write stories about, oh, you know, it was really difficult to just downsize from that $10,000 a month apartment, like that is a real turnoff for a lot of people, you know, because just can't relate to that level of money, for example. Versus, you know, things that are about the problems of renting or just the surfacing of data in terms of like what is actually going on with the market. How hard is it really to go buy a place? Where should I be looking? Where's that hot new neighborhood? Those kind of things. And this starts to relate in terms of stories like this. This is poor Jack, who we profiled as part of some of that launch stuff.
Jack's happy in his
Jack, yes, I say poor Jack. Yeah. Jack is thrilled with where he lives, but he lives in a 40 square foot closet in
East
Brooklyn,
Village,
in East Village, yeah. And you know, he's a musician. He's kind of creative type, but it's one of those quintessential New York real estate stories about the kind of crazy places where people work. So this is him in his crawl space, and it's so small he can't actually stand up at one end of it. It's actually slanted as well. But like we started to focus on these kind of things, like the just kind of bonkers nature of like what it means to live and work in New York. So yeah.
So that led to feature development based on user needs. So we have pictures of our users on our whiteboard walls in our team room. We have all of those pictures also in Confluence with profiles and explanations of who each of these users are, so that we can have that transparency for our team. And on top of that, we built user profiles. So generic profiles that really captured some of the challenges that our users were focused on. For example, Jamie is looking for an apartment in New York City. She's moving to New York. She needs a 4-bedroom apartment, 2-bathroom for $650,000. And I know you guys are probably not as familiar with the New York real estate market as Matthew and I are, but that is much lower than the average cost of probably a 1-bedroom apartment in New York. So if she was able to find that, that would be amazing. And she also wants a tennis court and a swimming pool, which I really don't blame her there. I want that too. In our original product, when we started this research, our feedback to her was, sorry, there's nothing there for you. But that's not helpful. That's almost a little bit judgmental. So how can we help Jamie in this tough time? How can our team build tools for her to really understand the compromises that she might have to make and where she's running into problems and why she's getting 0 results with that search? So what a lot of users don't notice is that they've got a bunch of filters set, and you forget about it. You set those filters, you say, I want to live off the 6, I want to live in these neighborhoods, and I want it to be a co-op building, and you forget about this. So we added that number 6 next to the active filters so she knows that she set those. We also added a tooltip and said, hey, you've got some filters set. Why don't you adjust those, or maybe add another neighborhood, because you can add that to your search bar. Why don't you tweak this? And you might get some more results. Another option that you have is to save this search, and we'll send you email alerts so you'll know when a new home is for sale that meets this criteria, and you don't have to come back every day. We'll send that to you. We will proactively reach out. And so that really allowed us, keeping the user top of mind, developing these features with the user, putting the user at the forefront for our development team. That allowed us to become more iterative and really align with the larger goals of the New York Times. And we're working in smaller teams and moving faster and thinking about the user and finding small ways that we can adjust to them. Like Matthew said, you know, the news isn't necessarily iterative, but the way that our users are consuming the news is. So how can we get in front of that? How can we let them know what's going on in all of the different war zones across the world in the way that they're actually consuming the news, and not just in the way that we're still building it, that we're still thinking about it. So the whole company as a whole is trying to get more iterative, and with these smaller teams thinking about the user, it allows us to build technology that is reliable and deliver the voice of the New York Times to the place that the user is at. So what's happening now?
Well, we're becoming ambassadors for process.
Oh.
That's really, why don't you tell us about that?
Yes, that is the thing that I'm talking about. So we're becoming ambassadors for process, which is really exciting for a project manager to work with a product owner, a designer, and a developer who go back to their colleagues and talk about the way that we work. That's huge for me, and it's something that we get other developers, other product owners coming to us asking how we use Confluence, asking us to go and talk to their teams and show their teams what we're doing. You can see here from Mehdi, who is the product owner for our watching product, which is a sister beta product. He really appreciates that when he has a question for us, when he's trying to understand why we made a business decision that we made, he can go to Confluence. Yes, he loves having coffee with us and having lengthy conversations, but if he can just get the answer in Confluence, that makes it move faster, and that allows us to spend our coffee time talking about Game of Thrones, which I know everybody wants to do. So how did that end up reflecting on the business side?
Well, Katherine, that's a very good question. So yeah, I mean, one of the things I always sort of worry about with this from the product side is that a lot of this process stuff is actually quite enjoyable for us to work on, but there's enormous risk that the process stuff becomes the work, and we're really sort of worried about that. It's like, you know, we become great at like writing stuff down in Confluence or, you know, creating great job stories, but it has to actually result in the business benefit or the reader benefit for us. So as a result of these things, there's sort of a number of things that happened. As a result of the newsroom using Confluence and really thinking about optimizing over time and things like that, we tripled audience within 2 years, really, really fundamentally as a result of writing down what was going on. It really it sounds as simple and as complicated as that. But also engagement is deepening and new habits are forming in the right places. Like the right kind of behavior is happening in the right places. Not just scaling, but we're actually like growing audience around like subscriber needs and reader needs, not advertiser needs. But as a result of that, revenue is now growing for the first time in 8 years as a result of this kind of problem solving as well.
Okay, you guys have listened to our story. I know this is the meat of what you want to hear. What can you do? What can you take back to all of your companies? And really, what are the actions you can take? So the first thing is establish the principles for your team and for your business and get them into Confluence. Make sure everybody knows what's going on and everybody's marching in the same direction. What next? Create this space and time for your team to do their best work. So part of our process with that was realigning our team roles. Get your team together. Have them meet. Make them turn their cameras on during stand-up. It's a lot easier to watch someone react to what somebody is saying and watch them go, oh, and then say, I'm sorry, Corey, what were you thinking? Did that meet your expectations? Than to detect that in their voice. Make them turn their cameras on. Let them do what they want in your Confluence space, because when you have a distributed team, your Confluence space is your team room. Let them make changes, let them add comments, let them talk, let them create pages. We put everything in our Confluence space. You'll see here the comparison of where we started to where we are now. Where we are now, we've got pictures of the newest VR 360 video that our newsroom did. We've got a summary of our last sprint. We have pictures of the entire team in there. We have examples of public presentations. This presentation is in our Confluence so our team can see it. We have there we go. We've got the phone number for our favorite pizza place. It's called Kiss My Slice. It's across the street. If you guys come to the Times, we'll go there. It's very good. But this is really a space for the team to come together. We've got pictures of our team in there. And at the close of this, I'm going to ask that we can all take a selfie together so we can add it to our Confluence page. So What's next, Matthew?
Well, one of the nice things about this whole process and this journey that we've gone on is that, you know, as ambassadors for process, a lot of what we've done has worked in terms of really thinking about user needs and turning that kind of stuff into things that can be monetized. And it's like a very, very sort of classic old media problem where organizations like ours are really struggling to sort of turn that ship in the right direction. So as a result of what we're doing in what we've done in real estate, we've been asked to work on something else, and we've been asked to work on a new problem that the Times is really thinking about, which is this idea of turning advice. We're very, like I said, we're a very service journalism heavy department in NYT Beta. So we talk a lot about guidance and insight and how we can leverage our journalism and our expertise. So we're really good at publishing advice, but we're not that good about turning advice into a much more meaningful difference in our readers' lives. Actually, not just telling them how to do something, but actually helping them overcome something within a certain time frame, for example. So we're thinking a lot about this kind of idea, and of course, it starts with the idea of writing out some principles, and of course, it starts with building a Confluence page. So we hope you enjoyed our stories. Thank you so much for coming, and we understand that we are the barrier between you and the bar. So come have a drink with us afterwards. Thanks a lot.